so right here we have the class opener. We are supposed to solve this absolute value equation. Now, in order for us to be able to solve the absolute value equation, we probably want to look at our notes that are on the side board right there. It says, to solve an absolute value equation, you must first make sure that the absolute value is isolated all by itself. And on all of our homework in this section, it's already done for us, right? So step 1 isn't even there. All you do is jump straight to step 2. And what is step 2? The setup. You do the positive situation and the negative situation. So for the positive situation, write it exactly the way it is without the absolute values. For the negative situation, write it exactly the way the positive situation is without the sticks, but also place a negative on your right side. And then step 3 is a solve. So we already know that this is isolated. So let's move on to setting up the positive and the negative situation. So we just read it. How do we do the positive situation? Everything without the sticks, right? So 3x minus 4 equals 11. And how about the negative situation? How do we do that? Same thing, just put a negative in front of that 11. So same thing, and putting a negative in front of the 11. Okay, so the positive situation, exactly the same without the absolute values, exactly the same, everything, identical, minus these absolute values. The negative situation, same exact thing over here, but the only difference is that 11 becomes a negative 11, okay? So now we need to solve both, okay? So this is something we need to understand. For each question, for each absolute value equation, we're really doing 2 separate problems. So it's like 2 for the price of 1, right? So every absolute value equation that I give you, it's actually like you doing 2 separate problems, the positive situation and the negative situation. So let's focus in on the positive situation. Let's solve that. You want to get x by itself. So what do I do to get x by itself? Plus 4, add 4 to get rid of that minus 4. We do to one side, do to the other side. That cancels. The 3x comes down, the equal sign, and 11 plus 4 is 15. So for my final step, what do I do?
Divide by 3.
Divide by 3, thank you. Divide by 3, cancels out. X equals 5. We have one answer. Now for the other one, we also need to solve it. We also need to get rid of that minus 4 first. So we're going to go plus 4 and plus 4. So we're going to rewrite this thing. We're going to have 3x equals negative 7. If you owe $11 and you have $4, you're going to still owe 7. So for my final step, I'm going to do what? Divide by 3, just like the other problem. However, right here, the negative 7 divided by 3, x equals, you could leave it, negative 7/3. Okay? If it were 6 divided by 3, then yeah, negative 6 divided by 3 would be negative 2. But negative 7 divided by 3, you can't do that. So you could just leave it like that. That is an improper fraction. You should also know how to rewrite that as a mixed fraction. So the numerator, the 7, should belong inside the division box, and it's being divided by 3, the divisor on the outside. So if you did want to change it to a mixed number, you would have to do this division problem. 7 divided by 3. 7 divided by 3, and of course it'll be negative. So the question is, 3 times what will get you close to 7 without going over? 3 times 2 will get you close to 7 without going over. That'll be a 6. And if you subtract, you're going to have a remainder. What's the remainder? 1. So what do we do with the remainder? You put it on top of what? The original divisor 3. So just in case you forgot how to change improper to mixed, the x equals negative 7/3 is really x equals negative 2 1/3. That's important, not really for the quizzes or tests that I give on Friday that are open response, but it is important for midterms and finals that are multiple choice. So if you get an answer like this, it might not be written like that on the multiple choice on the midterm or final. It might be written as a mixed number. So you need to be able to do it. Anyway, I hope we understand how to solve absolute value equations. Again, each one that I give you is really doing 2 separate problems, the positive situation and the negative situation. So it does take a while to do these guys. let's move on to this next one. Please copy this one down. It says write an absolute value equation given these solutions on the number line. So we have, let me zoom in a bit. We have two answers. We have the answer -5 and +2. And we need to come up with the absolute value equation that produces those answers of -5 and +2. So we do need to know that the midpoint is a very important detail when it comes to this type of question. Here are the notes that are on the wall. And if you compare this side of the notes, it says on this side of the notes to solve an absolute value equation. But over here, it says to write an absolute value equation. Okay, so this is what we're doing. We're writing an absolute value equation. So you're going to put the absolute values, you're going to put x, you're going to put minus, and the important thing here is midpoint. So it's x minus the midpoint. And then equals, and on this side, your number is going to be the distance from a point to the midpoint. We'll get to that part right now. Let's first start by finding that midpoint. So we're at -5, we're at +2. So let's go 1 unit in. Let's go another unit in. Let's go another unit in. And wow, where's my midpoint? Between -1 and -2. That's as horrible as it gets right here. That's my midpoint. And that happens to be -1.5, or you could say -1.5. Cool? That is our midpoint. So now that we know the midpoint is -1.5. Now that we know the midpoint, we know what to substitute into the absolute values with the x minus right in front of it. Remember, the setup is this: absolute value, and then you have x minus your midpoint. Now, what is the midpoint? -1.5. Okay, and then we have equals 2, and in case you forgot, so on this side we have the distance from the point to the midpoint. So let's go back and let's find the distance from this guy to here, or from here to here. It's the same thing because it's in the middle. So it doesn't matter which one you pick. Let's pick this one. You go 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units, and then halfway more. So 3.5 is the distance from the point to the midpoint. So once again, it's 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units, and a half. So it's 3.5. Now, believe it or not, this is our equation that we're looking for. That'll actually give the answers -5 and +2. I know it looks weird. To make it look a little nicer, we could say the absolute value of x plus 1.5 equals 3.5. This would be the equation that'll produce the answers -5 and +2, if you were to do the positive and negative situation. So check this out, guys. Let's do one more of writing the equation given the answers. So this is the setup right here. All right, what do I mean by this? The setup: absolute values of x minus the midpoint equals the distance from the point to the midpoint. So you're going to set it up: absolute value of x minus blank spot equals blank spot. And this first blank spot is the midpoint. So you go to your 2 points and you go find the midpoint, which happens to be -1. So -1 is the midpoint. You're going to put in a -1 right in there. Okay, it has to be exactly what the midpoint is. It's -1. It has to go in as -1, because that way you truly do change it to a ++ when you write your final answer. Now, how about the distance from the point to the midpoint? How many spaces was that? Or this way, how many spaces is that? 2. So this outside answer is 2, and that's it. That's how to write your equation. So it's not to be confused. I mean, you got to know what you're doing. You're either writing the equation or you're solving the equation. So let's pretend that this was a solving equations problem. So let's pretend that we had this problem, the absolute value x plus 1 equals 2. So on this one, you have to set up your positive and negative situation. And of course, how do you do that? The positive situation is exactly the same without the sticks. The negative situation, same thing, but you slap on a negative to the right side. Then you solve both. So on this one, I subtract 1, I'm going to get x equals 1. That's my answer. The other one, subtract 1, you're going to get x equals -3. And that's it. The only other section that will be asked on the quiz Friday is where I ask you to simplify, or I give you values and you plug in. So like let's say you had y minus the absolute value of x plus z, right? And I give you those values right there. So as you can see in this one, you just plug in your y value, your x value, and your z value, and then you simplify. It's not an equation, you're not solving. So we need to work through this, and do not make the mistake of changing these guys to plus plus. That would be incorrect. So what you want to do is do the absolute value of -2, which is +2, bring down everything, and then 5 minus 2 is 3, and 3 plus -8 is -5. So that's pretty much it. Those are the 3 types of questions you're going to be having on Friday's quiz with regards to solving absolute value equations, writing absolute value equations, and of course what we just did right here, which was just simplifying with absolute values.